I'm Ben Fazulin. Welcome. More than 2 months of war between Israel and Hamas have passed and the death toll continues to rise. Health officials in the Hamas-run Gaza Strip say over 17,000 people have died in the fighting, mainly civilians. That's stoking international calls for a ceasefire. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on Israel to prioritise the protection of civilian life, again underscoring Washington's position on the war.
As we stand here almost a week into this campaign in the South after the end of the humanitarian pause, it is imperative, it remains imperative that Israel put a premium on civilian protection. And there does remain a gap between exactly what I said when I was there, the intent to protect civilians, and the actual results that we're seeing on the ground.
And let's go over to Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem. Blinken's strongest public criticism of Israel's conduct of the war on Hamas. The reaction there?
Well, we've heard over the past weeks there's more and more pressure by the United States and more pushback, to do more to protect Palestinians, by the civilian population in Gaza. Now, Israel has said for many weeks as well that they're blaming basically Hamas, that they are using civilians as a human shield, and they are saying, the military here, that they're doing a lot to protect civilians, to tell them to evacuate certain areas, to give them corridors to move. They also published a map, detailing, splitting up Gaza in hundreds of little districts. But I talk to people in Gaza on the phone, as we as journalists cannot go there. They're telling me this is very confusing. We have to understand that over an estimated number of 1.8 million people out of the 2.2 million residents in Gaza, they have been displaced. They're all moved, many of them moved to the south. And of course now the ground operation also being expanded to the south. People simply have no place to go anymore to be safe. There's no safe area. That's what they are telling me. And even if there are evacuation calls to go to certain areas, there's still also airstrikes on other areas. So people are saying if there's no call for a full ceasefire, there's no safety and security for them in Gaza at the moment.
And Tanya, on the humanitarian front, we've heard that Israel's setting up a second checkpoint for trucks bringing aid to Gaza. How is that going to help?
Well, there's talk about the opening, or at least the partially opening of the Kerem Shalom crossing. Now, the beginning of the war, Israel had closed both of its crossings that are going into Gaza. So one is in the north, that's the Erez crossing. This is only for people to cross in and out. This one is closed. And there was also the Kerem Shalom crossing in the south, which has also been closed. This is where, before the war, usually goods were going in and out. Right now, aid is only coming in through the Rafah crossing with Egypt. So there has been talk, there's no time frame given if this will actually happen, that the crossing, the Kerem Shalom crossing, could help with the screening and the security mechanisms that Israel wants to see in place. But the other problem, actually, it's not just the crossings. What we're hearing from humanitarian organizations, from the United Nations, is actually right now the distribution of humanitarian aid coming into Gaza, because as there's heavy fighting reported also in the south, so most of the trucks that are coming in, and there are not that many coming in, but those who are coming in, they cannot reach the middle areas or the northern part, or even in the south. It's quite limited what we are hearing from the United Nations. And we had the Under General Secretary Martin Griffiths saying that we do not have a humanitarian operation in southern Gaza that you can call a humanitarian operation. I'm paraphrasing here anymore, because this is very difficult now to get the humanitarian aid to people there.
And Tanya, you mentioned the fighting in the south. What is the military situation right now for Israel?
Well, Israel is pushing ahead with its ground operation. There's still fighting going on, also, of course, in the northern area of the Gaza Strip. But there's a lot of focus now on the south, especially on the city of Khan Yunis, where Israel is saying that they assume part of the Hamas leadership might be in that area. It's also the hometown of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, who is seen by Israel as the main architect of the October 7th terrorist attacks. So most of a lot of focus is on the southern area at the moment, with bombardment, air bombardment, and ground operations, focusing also now on the whole of the Gaza Strip.
Tanya, thank you very much for the update, our correspondent in Jerusalem. Our correspondent Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem, and we'll talk to the Red Cross in a moment in Gaza. First, Israel says it will not let up in its drive to eliminate Hamas, considered a terrorist group by numerous countries. Here's more on the fighting in the south of the territory and the dire humanitarian situation.
Physical and emotional trauma continue to rain down on the Palestinian people of Gaza. And despite Israel declaring some areas to be safe zones, airstrikes are a constant threat.
We are with children, old people, and women. I beg you not to bomb us.
She and her family are among the 1.8 million people who are internally displaced. That's 80% of the population. Places to seek shelter are ever shrinking. Those who are able to escape bombings with their lives are barely living at all. Food, water, and other basics are scarce.
We came here, and as you see, there is no shelter, no tent, nothing, and even water. There are no toilets. Look at our children, how they look. There is no place to shower them. Today there were fights with people because of a small place. We cannot set up tents, nor can we cover our children.
This is the Mawasi camp in southern Gaza. The Israeli military has designated it as a safe zone, but there's no aid. It's an undeveloped land where already desperate people are living in squalid conditions. And strikes in Rafah near the Egyptian border have sown fear in those who have fled their homes to seek safety in the city's camp. Despite international calls for a ceasefire, heavy urban combat intensifies.
We're in the midst of persistent fighting along the entire strip. We are advancing in stages of combat, eliminating terrorists, including senior commanders hiding in underground tunnels, and also destroying terrorist infrastructure.
The UN has warned that Gaza is teetering on a humanitarian catastrophe, with hospitals unable to care for the injured and the growing threat of disease sweeping through refugee camps.
Stephen Ryan is a rapid deployment coordinator at the International Committee for the Red Cross and joins us from southern Gaza. How dire is the situation for civilians as the focus of fighting extends to the entire strip?
Well, thank you for having me on this morning, firstly. And as your listeners will have just seen and heard, the situation in Gaza is indescribable. The conditions that civilians are facing, the loss of life that continues to happen, and the extreme challenges that organisations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, are facing in bringing aid in to Gaza and being able to distribute it safely. Under the current conditions, we've reached the limit of humanitarian action in an environment like this.
Stephen, with 1.8 million people displaced, how many people does that mean you can actually reach if you've already reached your limits?
Well, in these sorts of conditions, one of the things that we need, absolutely, is a greater degree of aid to be able to enter the Gaza Strip. Right now, many people are without food, water. As you've seen, people are without shelter. People are without sanitation facilities. And these conditions are absolutely inhumane. But along with additional aid coming in, while some aid is trickling in, there's a need for more. But there's also the need to be able to distribute it safely and to make sure that we're able to do this in an organised way. In these current conditions, while people are moving, fleeing fighting from wherever they can go to wherever they can at least imagine that they might be safe, this makes humanitarian operations extremely difficult. Certainly, we have great challenges in getting the relief into Gaza, but the security conditions on the ground are not conducive to being able to provide humanitarian assistance. And this is utterly unacceptable.
How are you managing to stay safe and keep your own people safe while trying to help the people of Gaza?
Well, certainly the ICRC is continuing its activities on the ground with the limited resources that we have. In particular, our activities are focused on health. We're supporting hospitals here, and we have a medical surgical team who are providing assistance and operations and surgeries to people that have been wounded by the fighting. But these hospitals are overwhelmed. In recent days, I was visiting one of these hospitals, and they're full of people, jam-packed. I don't think that your viewers can possibly imagine that these places of safety and refuge are also places where hundreds of people are treated each day due to wounds that are caused by the ongoing fighting. In addition, people are struggling because many diseases are at risk of breaking out. People are very simple things like illnesses related to the cooling weather, related to the unsanitary conditions. And this is making it very difficult for them to access medical care because the number of people affected by the fighting continues to be extremely large. Our teams are doing their best that they can right now here in Gaza, but it's not going to be enough. We need much, much more access, and we need much more safety to be able to do our work.
And what about another truce? I mean, that helped the humanitarian situation somewhat recently. Do you expect any help from the UN Security Council when it votes later today on a push for a ceasefire?
Well, certainly our view is that this recent pause in the fighting was a moment of respite for people who have been devastated over the past more than 2 months. Anything that brings respite to the civilians who are affected by this conflict is a welcome step. But it's up to the people who are at the Security Council, these leaders, to recognise that now we have reached a point where civilians continue to suffer to an unacceptable degree. We, the International Committee of the Red Cross, will remain here in Gaza providing assistance regardless of the outcome of any of these discussions. But right now, what's needed is a recognition that civilians are continuing to suffer deeply.
You're doing an amazing job, Stephen Ryan from the ICRC in southern Gaza. Thank you for being on DW today.